I'm Marissa.
Hi,
Thank
how are you?
Just fine. Thank you for your understanding. I was going to write you earlier and the day got away and I thought, oh, good grief. Anyway, it's great. So you have to tell me how the picture is because it's bright here and I'm not too sure what'll make it easy for you to see me. But anyway, you tell me.
It's perfect how you are right now.
Wonderful. All
Yes.
right. Well, good to be with you. So it's your turn.
Okay. I just have like a few housekeeping things before we get started.
Sure.
Can you pronounce your last name for me to make sure that I'm saying it correctly?
Maas Weigert. They're my
Maas
last
Weigert.
Maas Weigert.
Okay,
Exactly.
perfect. And then how would you like me to refer to you?
Kathleen is absolutely great. A lot of my students did that when I was teaching, and I feel very comfortable with that. So I feel
Okay,
like we're getting to know each other, Marissa.
perfect. Okay. And then just so you know, I might interject when you're answering to confirm a date or to clarify so that our audience knows like the timeline of stuff that we're talking about.
Sure. That's great.
And then if I ask any questions that I would already know from like your CV and stuff, it's just for the benefit of our audience, just like re-asking that stuff.
Sure. That's good.
And then if I ask a question that you don't understand, just let me know and I'll rephrase it. And if you say something and want it cut out, just let me know. And we could take a pause and then like restart.
Sure. That's great.
I'm gonna set a timer to make sure that I'm respecting the time frame that you have. So let me just get that set up,
Right.
and
And
then
I
we can
did
get
say
started.
an hour, and I do mean it for you. Whenever it starts right now, an hour is what I said. And I said that to Andy. So, yes, that's great.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and then get started then with my opening.
Sure.
Hello, my name is Marissa Jason, and I'm a second-year law student at Penn State Dickinson Law. I am currently in the Mangona Lab. For the lab's Witnesses to Her Story project, we are capturing the personal experiences of women during a dynamic era in the United States. Today, I have the privilege of welcoming Dr. Kathleen Moss Weigert to join me. She is a professor emerita, developer of new academic programs, and author. Thank you, Kathleen, for joining me.
I'm delighted to be with you.
Okay, getting started, where were you born?
St. Paul, Minnesota.
And can you describe your family growing up? Who was in your household and what did daily life look like?
Sure. I had two older sibs and one younger in a very Catholic traditional kind of family and neighborhood. So my mother did not work outside the home, volunteered for the Cub Scouts and the Altar and Rosary Society, etc. My father was a president of a small business, a baker supply company. And we were really, I think we would say well off, but we had no idea when we were growing up that it was unusual. We went to Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, everybody wore uniforms, so there wasn't a lot of way of telling who were the rich kids and who weren't because you were all dressed alike. And so it was not part of the conversation. My family, I think, would be probably upper middle class in today's terms, but we had no clue what that would have meant at that stage. So I have recollections of a happy childhood. My father actually died when I was 16, but I have one story about that because, as I said, my father was the president of a small business, a baker supply company, and I was interviewing to get a job at the local bakery. Never entered my pea-picking mind that it was that my father might be supplying the goods for that guy, and that's why I got the job rather than I'm really talented and clever and smart. No, 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 no. I got the job because my dad was that I figured out years later. But I learned tons in being the bakery. And one of my favorite lines is the customer is always right. So you had to adjust. But anyway, a happy childhood. I hung around with a group of kids, mostly Catholic. Although my best friend was actually a Lutheran, but I kind of thought she was Catholic because they had 10 kids in the family and everybody had four, five, six, 10, whatever. So again, not really clicking that that wasn't really what it was,
Mm.
but really happy memories. So that's kind of the way I grew up.
Who do you feel made the household decisions?
I know who made them. My dad made the financial ones. Literally, my mother could write out the check, but only my father could sign the check.
Mm.
And I do remember a story from her saying one time she was shopping and got this lovely dress that she liked a lot. And my father made some complaint about it. I don't even remember the context, but she took it back because that was clearly not an appropriate thing and she wasn't going to put up with that. So,
Mm.
in terms of internal, all the regular things like where are we going to grocery shop? When are we going to do it? Who's cooking the meals? Traditional women's work. And my father did the driving. He wouldn't even allow my mother to get her license until a very long period of time. So, again, this was not atypical in my mind because most of the mothers, in fact, I can't remember any, did not work outside the home. So it was the men who were doing the traditional male job and women doing the traditional women's job.
And you said that you have siblings. How were the responsibilities divided among your siblings?
I think, again, more traditional. My sister and I did the dishes, and my brother, the younger one, was 5 years younger than I am. So there were three of us, like within 3 years. My older brother had a paper route, but on Sundays, the girls could help him at 4 a.m. in the morning deliver the papers, which were rather heavy. And
Mm.
that my mother could use. She could drive because who was out at 4 a.m. in the morning? And so in the house, we would have done all the housework. We did have a cleaning lady on Thursday. And so my mother prepared this meal. We always called it Mrs. Warren's hot dish. Mrs. Warren didn't make it. My mother made it on the day, the cleaning lady. She did the ironing and the mangling, all that kind of stuff. But we just loved it. It was super good. So we always called it Mrs. Warren's hot dish. That was the one professional help that my mother got in
Mm.
doing the household chores. Tom would have done mowing the lawn. He's my older brother. But otherwise, I think just kind of traditional things that girls did. I
And did
learned
you notice that difference in the difference of like responsibilities and what the roles were?
say that again.
Did you notice like the difference between the responsibilities? Like was that something that was just normal to you?
It was just normal. I don't think I really reflected on it, except when I got to be a teenager. And then things became self-evident that, gee, who is doing the dishes? And we would have lots of my mother's side of the family, where we were very close to, and cousins about the same age. And so we would have Easter or Christmas, those kinds of things together. And my sister played the piano. And when I realized what was going on, I said I would help turn the page because then all the uncles sang while Mary played and I turned the pages and all the women did the dishes.
Mm.
Ah, not a bad idea. I like turning pages. That really, anyway, that I was older when I finally realized this is what's happening, and I
Mm.
wasn't paying a lot of attention to when I was younger.
Mm. And how do you feel that your parents regarded education?
Essential and willing to pay for it. As I
Mm.
said, we went to Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, and they were within walking distance. This is when parishes had churches and schools, and they were overflowing with people. This has changed a lot, as I'm sure you know,
Mm.
Marissa, over the years. So, really important that education was prized by the family and other ways of indicating it. We had magazines coming into the house, both Catholic and lay. Saturday Evening Post, you probably don't even know what that is, but things like that, Reader's Digest, my mother loved, but then Catholic magazines as well. So you knew that reading was important and that education was something that you should make sure you do well at. Part of the school meant work. You took your report card home and your parents had to sign it. So you'd have these conversations about, how about that? What about that grade? What do you think? So
Mhm.
you knew education was really an important thing.
Do you know if your mom ever had a desire to go to college?
She actually did for a while. She wanted to be a nurse, and later on, we talked about she never really was going to be a nurse, but she had to stop college because her father died, and my mother was the oldest of six, well, actually seven, but one died as a child, siblings. So she had to help my
Mm.
grandmother pay the bills and make sure things were all right. So my mother got a job and that ended her college career. My father did have a couple of years of college as well. So again, you grow up thinking, well, you go to college, don't you? And there
Hmm.
was some evidence that the answer is yes, but finances mattered for my mother. One of the kind of jokes in those days was my mother came from the wrong side of the tracks, and my father came from a very wealthy place. Again, I didn't realize all of these things till I became a teenager and started to hear some of these stories.
How do you think your mom having to provide financially for her family shaped how she raised you and your siblings?
I think mom became a much more independent person because of it. She learned lots on the job training to be a widow because then she was in charge of everything. And I'm impressed with how much she learned and managed while we were all still growing. I will admit, Marissa, my dad died when I was a junior in high school. I lived in fear for the next 2 years that my mother was going to die because it
Mm.
was like, oh my Lord, what would we do? But she did such a wonderful job of managing all of that. It was terrific. My father, on the other hand, did not leave a will.
Mm.
And that meant it had to go through probate, and then the assets were really divided between my mother and the children. So I ended up having a portfolio of stocks that were blue chip. I mean, it was, again, I knew nothing. GM, US Steel, what did I know? Pacific. But mother just did a fabulous job for us, I think.
That's very cool. So you said that you went to Catholic grade school. How do you feel like that shaped your faith and your social values and your upbringing?
I think it was an extension of what the family did. So let me do the family and then I'll get to the school, Marissa. As I said, very Catholic. So we said the
Mhm.
rosary every night. Now that you probably know enough about that, I don't have to explain. But the way we did it is we always went up to my parents' bedroom, knelt around the bed, and my older brother Tom and I would race upstairs to light the candle because that was the big deal. So much for praying. You know, what did I just knew I wanted to light that candle. And we
Mhm.
prayed. And the joke was if friends in the neighborhood came while we were playing the rosary, either you come upstairs and pray the rosary or you go away because the rosary is the rosary and we do those things. So, we went to Mass every Sunday. We went to confession, Sacrament of Penance on Saturday. All of those things were embedded in the family. So to go to the Catholic school was an extension of that. But I do have a couple of memories. The, the group of religious sisters that taught me were Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet. And in about the fourth grade, I was asked to dress up like a nun and walk across the stage for one of the performances we were doing. I'm sure that planted some type of seed, and I'll get to it later, but it was like, wow. And afterwards, the sister who had chosen me said, you did a great job, except you never looked at the audience. And I thought, I didn't know I was supposed to look at the audience. I was supposed to walk across the stage. So that's one. But the second and more important probably is one of the things in growing up in and having this kind of a school was that you raised money for what we used to call in those days pagan babies, to raise pennies and nickels to send to the missionaries who were going to far off places to present them with the saving idea of Jesus Christ. And you could raise money for pink babies or blue babies. So the gender sex differentiation was built into the raising the money. And I was one of the people who did it. And I think I reflected on that any number of times afterwards. That told me I was part of something much larger than my family, much larger than my school. I was part of something that was worldwide, and it just blew my mind that my little pennies would have something to do with somebody else's life. And I think that stayed with me and led me to all kinds of things that I'm sure we'll get to. But so very important, the school affirming and extending what I was learning and practicing in my home.
How did it make you feel to be contributing to like that bigger cause at a young age?
Incredibly important, mind-blowingly so that it was, wow, I have something to do with people I'll never know. I won't know the missionaries. I won't know these people, but I'm helping. That's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it. It really is amazing to me. I do have one other story from grade school that I think, again, partly family, partly school. There was a young girl in my class, this must have been fourth or fifth grade, who was a little off. I mean, in those days, we would have said either retarded or mentally something or other, but we were on the playground and she gravitated toward me. I'm not really sure why, but I hope it's because I was nice to her. But one of the boys started yelling at her and it just infuriated me. And I shouted at him, "Stop that. That's not right." And I thought, I don't know where that came from, Marissa, but that's my first real sense of some people are more vulnerable and you have a voice. And I've used that example any number of times because I can't really identify all of the factors that led me to that moment to tell this young kid in my class what he was doing was wrong. But it's clear it's one of the first sense of justice that it wasn't fair that I honestly remember, and I'm grateful for it.
How was a girl standing up to a male classmate regarded at that time?
Well, I'm sure there was a little hesitation, but girls were smart in those days. I mean, they are now today, but the boys weren't known for doing a whole lot in school. Plus,
Mm,
honestly, Marissa, I'm rather competitive. And everything was separated, boys versus girls. So there was a race in gym, and I beat all the girls, and this guy beat all the boys, and then I had to race with him, and I beat him. So,
mm,
and he actually ran into the wall, and I thought, oh my God, he's going to crack his head. Luckily, he didn't. But I don't know. The Catholic world was pretty sex segregated,
mm.
but crossing those boundaries, I think it depended on the circumstance and whether you were taken seriously or not. I don't know.
When you say that boys weren't doing very much in school, can you elaborate on that?
Well, who's in charge? Who gets the accolades? So I'll
Mm,
give you another example because this is my life. When you're learning about the Catholic faith in grade school, this is in the 50s, you use something called the Baltimore Catechism, and it's a question and answer set of things about who is God, why did God make you, etc. Well, the way, again, stereotype the world and you say it's boys versus girls. We used to play catechism baseball. So you need a pitcher to ask the question of the person, and then you need a catcher who, if that kid doesn't answer the question properly, the catcher is on it. Okay, I was the catcher because I knew the catechism really well. And so there you are. And a lot of the guys weren't as interested in the catechism. Well, a
mm,
lot of girls might not either, but because again, the family and the school background, I was very interested in it, and
mm.
memorizing was what you should do. And I could still tell you what's the answer to why God made you. So someday we might have a quiz for you. Anyway, so
Were
that's,
there any particular adults who influenced how you saw your future or that you considered a mentor?
well, my future, looking at the women religious, they did everything.
Mm,
They were the principal, they were the art teacher, they were the math teacher. So knowing that women were doing things of that importance was clearly influential. It was probably even more so in high school. When I went to a high school that was run by the Sisters of Charity, the Blessed Virgin Mary. And
mm,
there it was even more evident because the treasurer and then the principal and all the teachers, with a few exceptions, some terrific late women who taught as well, but you knew you could do anything because there was the PhD in physics, using cutting edge books. So I think that's all part of an environment that says girls matter.
mm,
And it was a girls' high school. So you're not wondering what you're wearing because there are five cute guys next to you. No, the guys were in their own school and the girls were in theirs. So there wasn't that kind of sexual attraction issue when you go to a girls' Catholic high school. It's everybody who does anything is a woman. So I think that had a lot to do with the later choices I made.
Mm. Do you feel like that environment of being all girls like allowed you to excel and kind of stand out?
I do think so. I became senior class president. I was an officer all 4 years. And I think I'm not sure what would happen if I were in a public high school at that point. My older brother did go to a public high school. But yeah, there was something about that environment of learning and competing in ways that were emphasizing excellence and working hard and doing what you could with the sense that you're part of something larger than yourself. This is your class, this is your team, whatever it was. So I think those kinds of ideas are strong when you have that kind of single sex high school. Neither of our children went to a single sex school because by the time they were ready, there weren't any. That's again the sign of the church changing over the years because we planned on sending them to, there was a Catholic high school at that time that was single sex. It was gone by the time our kids were ready. So they did go to Catholic grade school and Catholic high school, but they were boys and girls, so
Mm.
a whole different life. My husband is from New York and went to a Catholic parish school, so boys and girls there, went to a boys' single-sex school, Xavier, run by the Jesuits in high school, and eventually, after a year of college, joined the Jesuits. So we can get to that at some point.
Is there a reason that your brother went to a public high school and you went to the all-girls Catholic high school?
Yeah, the simple reason is he didn't pass the test. You had to take tests to get into the Catholic schools. Tom was never a student. I mean, he was never really interested in reading. He was interested in sports and cars and things like that. School could have mattered less to him.
Mm.
So he didn't pass the test. So the end result is you go to the nearest public high school, which he did.
So a woman named Marian Wright Edelman has a great quote that says, "You can't be what you can't see." So along those lines, what kind of jobs did you see women doing or that you were being exposed to when you were in high school?
Yeah, it's mostly through the nuns that you saw you could get a PhD, you could teach, you could do administration, all of that. And not so much, again, remember Catholic neighborhood moms staying at home. So not so much doctors, all the doctors we ever had were white men.
Mm.
So, and the doctor lived a block and a half over, brought his little black bag to the house if we were sick. I mean, that's a whole different world. So, and if there anybody that we knew was in medicine, they were nurses. They were not doctors.
Mhm.
So there is a stratification. Again, I don't think I was conscious of this, Marissa, as much as I'm articulating it now. But it was clear that women did certain things. They were secretaries, they weren't the president. So it was quite evident. And one of the ways out of it, we had a couple of cousins who joined the military, both men and women, because they saw that as a way of advancing in a system that might be different than trying to advance in the civilian society. So yeah, I can't remember thinking, I could be a lawyer. They all the lawyers we knew were again white men.
Did you ever get the sense that it might be harder for women to pursue a career if they weren't part of a religious community like the nuns at your school were?
I don't know if I thought about that as much as I did once I got into college and saw the variety of ways in which women were advancing. Back to the high school. The high school run by the Sisters of Charity, the Blessed Virgin Mary, commonly referred to as the BVMs. They had two colleges, one
Mhm.
in Dubuque, Iowa, one in Chicago. And again, they did everything. They were the head of it, they were the secretary, they were the financial officer, they were you name it. If you're going to run a college, the women were doing everything. So that gave you a sense that there were roles one could play, but I didn't really experience that in the secular society until probably late late teens, and then when I finally after a couple of years in the convent, I transferred to the University of Minnesota, and that's when you see a whole explosion of women doing various things, and some of my high school buddies going on in law school, which was kind of unusual in those days. Now the numbers are astronomical. You know, it could be 40, 50%, and some law schools are women. And one of our daughters chose law school.
Mm.
So I don't know if I became as aware of it until probably when I was doing my own PhD and getting involved in professional societies and learning about other people's experiences, both at public and private colleges and families. And so it expands your horizons, which is one of the great things about college, I think.
Mm. Um, so what year would it have been when you graduated high school?
1961.
So 1961, that like in the 60s, that's when a lot of these statutes for women started being passed. Do you recall hearing about any of those things, like the Equal Pay Act or the Civil Rights Act?
Certainly the civil rights. I don't think I became as aware of the equal pay idea until I actually team taught a course at the University of Notre Dame where I got my PhD with another a colleague, and we did one of the first sex role courses at the time. So civil rights was very important in the 60s for sure, and it was most important when I was at the University of Minnesota, which would have been I transferred in 64 and got my bachelor's in 66 and my master's in 68. So those are heydays for when a lot like Selma, if you've studied anything and know about Selma,
Mhm.
I was active at the University of Minnesota in two things. One was the Newman Center, which was the Catholic Student Association place,
Mhm.
and the other was the Minnesota Student Association, which is the kind of the political stuff. And I was co-chair of what in those days was the, gosh, I don't even know if I can remember it, but it was basically the race group, but it was like human interaction. Or I'd have to go back and look at some notes to see it. But Selma was very real. And
Mm.
I was, as chair of this organization at the U of M, the guy was John. He and I, Selma just exploded. And one of the big decisions people had to make is in our generation, if you were interested in this, is would you go to Selma when the call was to Selma? John and I went back and forth, and finally decided we couldn't do it. My mother was relieved because by this time, remember, my father died when I was in high school, really relieved. And so we went, John and I went to the advisor, the faculty advisor to the human diversity group or whatever it was called. And he said, that's a fair decision. But what are
Mm.
you going to do about racism?
Mm.
Wait, what are we going to do? John and I talked and finally decided we need to organize a group from the U of M to go to Chicago, which was a pivotal place for race issues that were just vibrant. Of course, later on, I realized the racism in my own backyard, but that's another point. So John and I organized a group to go to Chicago. We stayed at the Y and we met local people who were involved in all things like TWO, the Woodlawn organization, which was a hugely important thing, fighting the University of Chicago as it was spreading out its wings and trying to grow. And one of our co-hosts invited me, would I like to go to this evening session of the Amistad Society? I thought that was kind of Latin for friendship, and I thought, well, this is cool. I should do this. So
Mhm.
we're driving in the park and we go up three flights, open the door, and I'm the only white person in this room. And I
Mm.
literally, Marissa, panic. My heart palpitated. I thought, my God, I've got to get out of here. I've never been with, on and on. But people kept coming up to me and saying, hi, who are you? What are you doing here? That's a great idea. We all should do. I mean, they were phenomenal. But that just goes to show you, I'd been studying racism, got a lot of head understanding. Emotionally, I was in another place because I did not have lots of experiences that opened up those ideas to the real world. So it's moments like that when you realize, my God, I have racist ideas embedded in my being. If it
Mm.
weren't for that experience, I don't think I would have followed all kinds of things that I did as a result. So I owe it to it. Years later, learned the Amistad was one of the slave ships. And I thought, oh my
Mm.
gosh, talk about not knowing what you're doing. But I'm grateful for that man, the guy who, the co-host who invited me, and for the lesson it taught me. It was a
Mm.
profound lesson to learn,
So I saw that you taught a class called Students and Social Change from the 1960s to the 1990s.
right?
How were you able to incorporate your own experiences with these social movements into teaching that class?
That would be one of the ways to talk about as a college student what I had done and what lessons I learned as a result, and introducing them to other people who were involved in students for change of different kinds, hunger issues, homelessness, etc., to see how each of us can do something. We don't all have to protest, we don't all have to go to Selma, but we have some obligations if we believe that the world isn't the way we'd like it more just, more humane, then what are we going to do? And helping them understand organizing. How do you organize? How do you form a group? Used an example when I was at the University of Notre Dame as a grad student. I was part of a local group of women who asked me to start a chapter at Notre Dame. It was the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which I loved, but that at that point, and still, that one of their core tenets was women should have the right to choose when it comes to abortion, free choice. And I said, I'm not going to be able to start a chapter like that at Notre Dame. That is a Catholic university. But I found three students whom I had taught in peace studies and said, how'd you like to start a group? And we named it Women United for Justice and Peace. So I would use examples like that. You can do things. You can invite others to join you and think about what difference you'd like to make and work toward it. So I think you, as a teacher in something like that, but other courses as well, you incorporate your own experiences, the lessons you've learned, what it said about you, the networks you build, what it says about others, and how you bring about social change. So I hope it worked.
Mm. And I'd love to get more into your teaching later, but before we do that, going back more broadly to your time at the University of Minnesota, what did you think it was like being a woman in college during that period? How did that feel?
Well, you have to remember, I briefly said I was in the convent for 2 years, so
Mhm.
that's more all women and very important part of my life help solidify my spiritual formation. Then went to the College of St. Catherine's for 2 semesters, basically, because they let me in. And I had just come out of the convent, and that was
Mm.
wonderful. But I knew I wanted to major in international relations. By then, all those little seeds had come together academically. So I transferred to the University of Minnesota. The difference between a small Catholic women's college and the University of Minnesota is like going from a small town to a major city. All right,
Mm.
there are a gazillion people. I had no idea what a GPA actually meant, how you figured out your GPA. One of my friends helped me understand credits for course,
Mm.
grades, numbers, etc. I was totally naive in ways that I probably shouldn't have been. But it was there that then you saw women professors in this very important place. And so you
Mm.
knew there were ways of doing that, and you could do that. I wasn't really at that point interested in a teaching career. I really did want to learn 42 languages, become the head of the UN and save the world. I mean, it was, these are the 60s, and anybody who is with more people than one starts to think about larger issues, whether you are
Mm.
pro, con, or wherever they are. So I think I had that sense, and that you had to stand on your own and you're going to have to figure out what resources you need because there wasn't somebody right around the corner saying, hey, if you want to do this, come talk to me. No, you had to search out things. So it was a growing experience. And lodging myself into the Newman Center and the MSA, the Minnesota Student Association, gave me a home within this humongous university.
Mm.
50,000, I can't even remember the numbers at the time. And being in IR, international relations, you paid a lot of attention to what was going on around, and Vietnam was raising its head and
Mm.
protest development, etc. women's movements, all those things were kind of coming, as well as within my own church. The Second Vatican Council occurred in 1962 to 65. So now I'm at the University of Minnesota, 64 on. So the church is changing. And
Mm.
I have one story on that one that just helped me in my life. So I'm active at the Newman Center and we're reading books and running programs, etc. But I'm talking with a few other students and one of the priests. There were a couple of priests who ran it. In order to be a priest, you have to be male. That would be the sign of the Catholic Church. But these were guys that were just, open to all kinds of ideas. So
Mm.
we're in this little conversation, and he's getting more and more annoyed at me. And at one point, he literally stops and says, "Why are you asking me? You are the church."
Mm.
I'm a church, not so much. It's the Pope, the bishops, the priests. I'm the church. Changed my life. I'm the church, Marissa. They can't get rid of me. I am the church. I mean, it was profound, and it's has shaped my sense of lay leadership, how lay people should really be running parishes with the priest doing a particular role. I mean, it was like night and day. So a lot of different kinds of experience in that heyday of church change, societal change, cultural change, all of that.
Do you feel like that conversation kind of empowered you to take the path that you did in regard to teaching about Catholic social tradition and stuff like that?
I do think so because it did lead me that way. Among other things, again, that early justice experience coming from a family and schools where there were global issues. I think they all coalesce in that moment in time. It allowed me to think about what was possible and how could I think about moving forward. And the church, because I am the church, mattered a whole lot. And it's little by little that I learned about the Catholic social tradition. I really didn't know that as an entity until probably late 70s, early 80s. I was very interested in women's stuff. I wrote one of my first papers on housework that women did just in 1972 when the Title IX, all of that changed. And I became much more conscious of the structures that impinge on people and either shape or don't shape their choices. So, yeah, the CST is we call it, but most people say that's Catholic social teaching. But I've always insisted it's Catholic social teaching, Catholic social thought, and Catholic social tradition. The
Mm.
people who live it out who'll never be well known, or even if they are, they're not going to be saints, but they're living it out in ways that matter for people's lives. And that led me eventually to learn more, read more, study more, get in groups who cared about the CSD, and that has shaped a lot of my career ever since.
Mm. It's so interesting. So like moving into your master's degree, how did you
Right.
see the class makeup change from when you were an undergrad?
Well, remember, I'm an undergrad at the great University of Minnesota,
Hmm.
and the grad school meant a couple of things. It meant much more intense interaction with a professor, smaller
Mm.
classes, and reading incredible amounts of reading and thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And I can remember in a political theory course, for whatever reason, the prof asked me to read these books and tell everybody what they were all about. And I thought, this is not going to go well. But I did what I could. And then after I did my presentation, he said, thank you very much. And then proceeded to say what really should have been said in those books. And I thought, oh boy, I got a lot to learn, don't I? The other one that stands out in my mind is there was a professor, brand new from Yale, big deal degree. She had us doing a model UN kind of experience. So she would give, we were in teams, and I was with somebody else doing the Republic of South Africa. And then there would be an event, and we had to respond to it from the point of view of the Republic of South Africa. And this happened over a period of weeks, probably one of the best experiences educationally because it threw the burden on us
Mm.
to do the research, to come up with the details, to get the evidence in order to respond to this event that she and her team were floating in our lives. So, different experiences in education as a grad student than I had had as an undergrad were there were huge classes. I do mean huge. I did have to take econ, and one of the parts of the econ was you went to an auditorium where one of the gurus from the Kennedy administration who'd written a book was talking to you and the other 400 in the class. And then you went to these little sessions with the grad students who were trying to teach you what exactly Samuelson was saying in a very famous econ book. So experiences that I had never had prior to,
Mm,
my experience. But grad school, really important in terms of refining my thinking, expanding it at the same time, and trying to see where this was going to lead me. Eventually, I thought I might go on for a PhD, but then life happened, and I met my now dear husband, and we made some decisions together that changed the trajectory, and I went on for a PhD in sociology.
mm. Were there a lot of other women that were pursuing master's degrees when you were?
A handful.
Mm,
IR is at that point still a lot of these fields were dominated by men.
mhm,
So there weren't a lot of women. But anybody who went into IR versus poli sci or one of the more traditional, they had somewhat of an open mind to thinking about how are we doing things differently? What does it mean to think about an international order, law and order? What does it mean? So I never really felt second class as a woman in that because I thought these other people were kind of after the same thing as I was, trying to better understand how do we shape institutions that will allow for more peacemaking rather than military responses to everything under
mm.
the sun.
How did it feel being a part of this smaller group of women that was kind of trailblazing women being able to get higher degrees and be in higher education?
Yeah, good question. I don't know if I thought of it as deliberately about that, because I had a couple of friends doing it. And remember, I was in a convent, so my convent friends
Mhm.
were still my convent friends, and they were proceeding to get advanced degrees. So I had this mind that, well, of course you do this. Why wouldn't you do this? So I can't tell you that I felt like a trailblazer in that sense of the term. I probably did more in my sociological research and doing that paper on housework as women's work and
Mhm.
presenting it at one of the regional meetings of sociology and people saying, you've got to get that going because that's really important stuff. So feeling there, like, oh, there's something here. And it led in part to one of my colleagues and I got the first grant to start the gender studies program at Notre Dame.
Mm,
So those kinds of things were real. And I was part of what was called the Committee W, the Women's Committee for the Association of University Professor, a Association of American Professors. I can't even remember all the initials anymore. So there were a number of us at Notre Dame coalescing together because it was clear that this was a very patriarchal place.
mm,
And remember, Catholic president, all the officers at that point, many priests, but men or
mm,
a woman religious who was one of the assistant or associate provosts at one time. So that experience, you knew women were coming along in ways they hadn't, because Notre Dame didn't go co-ed till 1972, and that's when I was working on my PhD. Women religious had been at the campus for years to
mm,
get degrees, but often in habit. And so they weren't the models that most of us were thinking about. So we were trying to organize and make sure that people knew that there were women here. Magazines, Notre Dame magazine did specials on us several different times about how are things going for you women, that kind of thing. So I felt it more there. Once you're at a public university, I didn't have that same feeling of trailblazing. I knew it at Notre Dame without a
mm.
doubt.
So you said that a lot of your friends that were in the convent with you were also pursuing these higher degrees. What was it about being in the convent that you think led to that kind of result?
Well, we chose an order that was known for education. So
Mm,
when you sign up for this group, you know the odds are you're going to get some type of advanced degree, enough certainly to be able to teach in the high schools and the grade schools that the
Mm,
religious community had already formed. So there were that was just what you did. You'd go to one of the nursing orders or one of the social work orders if you wanted to do that kind of work.
mm,
So you chose this one because at some point you thought teaching would really be good for you.
mm,
A little parenthetical on this one because this is true to heart again. Marissa, when I was in high school, I was an officer all the time each year, and then I got elected senior class president. But I was not a born public speaker. My voice shook. I mean, I could go like this when I was supposed to talk. I mean, it was a nerve-wracking. I mean, nerve-wracking. The only reason I could give the commencement address is because I had to practice it 49,000 times to not have my voice crack because I
mm,
was a bundle of nerves. In the convent, they made you take a public speaking course. Marissa, it probably saved my life because that's when I learned about posture, about voice, about audience interaction. Honestly, it was because of that that I could do all the things, speak to 2,000 people or 20. That it was because they knew there was a skill there. And if you
mm.
didn't have it, you take this course and you're going to get that skill. Marvelous, just marvelous to think about. So I think once joining the BVMs, you knew teaching was going to be it. So they, all of them expected they would get masters at least. Some would go on for PhDs, depending on what the college needed. They had two colleges or their own personal interests.
How did that skill of having public speaking kind of down pat from the convent help you when you were a professor?
Totally. I could not have been a professor because you do have to profess, you have to talk. Without that course and those experiences, honestly, Marissa, it changed the fact of my liking
Mm,
to be in education. I think the other thing about why being in education, Paulo Freire wrote a book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which
mm,
was translated and came out when I was a graduate student. It's one of the most important books for my own thinking about what is education. And I'm a firm believer in experiential learning as a key to any and everything. So much so that one of my buddies in grad school at Notre Dame, when we were getting our PhDs, he and I decided we would teach what in those days was a simulated society project written by Bill Gamson, an important professor at Boston University. And it was called SimSoc, Simulated Society. And there were
mm,
four different parts. One was the red, the other three different colors, but the red had no resources, nothing. It was like poverty personified. And
mm,
then the whole point of doing SimSoc was to see how people would organize, how they would work with others to get the resources they needed without blowing up the whole system. If the students remember anything from that course, I think they probably remember being part of SimSoc. I
mm,
know how important that could be, and it was because of people like Paulo Freire, who actually a pedagogue from Brazil, who helped the poorest, the most vulnerable, understand their own power to help shape their own lives. So I'm a firm believer in experiential learning, and that's been a key to all of my teaching. Uh,
mm.
that and the public speaking, being able to speak in public was pretty pivotal in CST, especially I've been in Catholic higher education. Once I got my 2 degrees at Minnesota, I've been in Catholic higher education the rest of my life. So
Mm.
working around CST, experiential learning, lots of speaking and workshops all came together, I think, for me, really nicely.
So you ended up getting your PhD at Notre Dame, correct?
Right.
In sociology.
Yes.
What made you switch from international relations to sociology?
The real reason is any number of people said to me, you will never get a job with a
Mm,
PhD in IR. Nobody hires IR people. Get a degree in one of the traditional fields where you've emphasized the international relations aspect of what you're
mm,
doing. And by then, Andy and I were married, and I thought, I had a couple of courses in sociology, and it just seemed to me that that was the right field at the right time for me to be in. I'm much more a political sociologist than Andy's a kind of a social symbolic interaction kind of guy. But it was really important. And of course, as I proceeded, Andy and I really did want to have kids, and I got pregnant just as I was finishing my PhD, and I got a part-time job in the Department of Sociology from which I had gotten my degree. I did not tell them I was pregnant at the time because I thought that might not go over well with them.
Mm-hmm.
So Karen, our firstborn, was late. She was supposed to be a baby in August, and of course she comes September 3rd, but
Mm-hmm.
I've already committed to teaching and I'm going to breastfeed. And luckily, there were some women grad students who loved babies and would take care of her while I was teaching. So then I could go back to breastfeeding. Whew. So I managed, honest to God, I don't know how, because we didn't have parental leave, maternal leave, none of that. So I went back to teaching 10 days after she was born. I think I slept through that semester. I honest to God don't know if I taught anything well. So we have to be frank about this. But I then also applied to reapply to be part-time in the following year. And I was given a terminal contract.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, what? I had finished my PhD. The two guys that had started at Notre Dame the same as I did hadn't finished theirs. I had already published out of my master's thesis in one of the big journals in the field. And I'm thinking, what the heck is this all about? So I go to the chair and he says, it's not my decision. You better go see the dean. And I think, what
Mm-hmm.
is going on? So I make an appointment to see the dean. And the dean basically tells me there were two reasons I wasn't going to be continued. One of them was that my area of study, namely political sociology, was not really needed. Marissa, this was the 60s. There were student demonstrations all over the place. Things were happening. Gene McCarthy came to campus. There were debates. Robert Kennedy, the whole thing. Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy assassination. I could have taught basket weaving in sociology, and it was the hottest major ever. We had Phi
Mm-hmm.
Beta Kappas coming out the ear. So I knew that was nonsense because it was self-evident sociology was very important and all of these things mattered to
Mm-hmm.
realize. And then he said, and the second reason is you're married to Andy. So this is nepotism issues. And I do have a snotty side, to be quite frank, Marissa. So I'm basically the equivalent. I said, okay, so if I divorce Andy, I can work in the department. No, no, no. But you understand. I said, no, I really don't.
Yeah.
I find this not right at all, and I wasn't going to get renewed. So Andy and I talked, and I said, I'm filing a complaint with EEOC, the Equal Employment
Mm-hmm.
Opportunity Commission. Those were the days when a million people were filing complaints. So you tell your story to one lawyer, and they leave, and then you have to tell your story to another lawyer, and it goes on and on. And by that time, Andy had an offer as a visiting professor at Yale in the divinity school because he did sociology of religion. So we
Mm-hmm.
decided we're leaving and we'll figure this all out. So we went to Yale, and our second daughter was born at the Yale Hospital. Great experience. Someday we can talk about that. And while Andy was teaching, I was doing writing on my PhD because the idea is you want to share the knowledge. I had done my PhD on Black soldiers stationed at V Corps in Germany. Long story, but so I was writing articles based on that. One came out in Public Opinion Quarterly. I was doing all the things you want to do if you're thinking you might want a career in higher ed. And sorry, we looked for jobs out east because I wasn't going to get one at Notre Dame after all.
Mm-hmm.
And Andy got an offer at St. John's on Long Island. I got an offer at the University of Connecticut. Frankly, about the University of Connecticut, when I was there and interviewing grad students, everybody, there was a U-shaped room, and I was going to meet with the grad students. Now, I told you I'm a political sociologist, so I know the power person sits at the head. but you know, believe in experiential learning and that other people. So I didn't sit in the power position. When I was told that I wouldn't be getting the job, I knew somebody really well who said, "Yeah, the grad students thought you were a little, you weren't, you were a little shy about being powerful." And I
Mm,
thought, "Oh boy, they got a lot to learn." But the woman who was offered the job turned it down. I was their second choice. I got an offer from UConn, but by then, Marissa, we had two kids under 2.5. Andy would be at St. John's, I at UConn. Somebody would have to be traveling, somebody would have to be with the kids, and it just didn't make sense to us, honestly. So we went back to Notre Dame, and because of wonderful opportunities, I formed a career that ended up being really an administrator, faculty type. I ran some programs at Notre Dame, and then I went off to Georgetown to head up a center there. We were just starting, so I'm the founding director. Went from there to Loyola to do more social justice work. So I've had a wonderful career, but
mm,
it started with not getting a spot that I wanted to have, which was a tenure track position early on. But life doesn't happen the way you want it to, and you adjust. And if you got a loving spouse like I do, you make a decision together on what will be the right thing for the family. Andy, by
mm.
the way, taught 50 years at Notre Dame. He retired in
Wow.
2018. But after I didn't get that job, I worked as a dean and ran a program. And eventually, students and some others wanted to start a Center for Social Concerns. And the
Mm,
head of it was Don McNeil. And I'd known Don because we shared an office in the basement of the library. Don asked me to come on board as the academic. There would be a service part and an academic curricular part. And he asked me if I would do that as we started that center. And that's
mm,
what I did. Loved it, taught peace studies, taught in American studies. Eventually, Don was going to retire. And of course, we thought I would be asked to be the director because I had the credentials and I had done the academic work. The president then of the university said, "No, no, we're going to get another priest." And it was at that point that my husband said, "Well, toss your hat in the ring." I said, "What ring?" He said, "Well, you
mm,
know all those people around the world. Talk to them." So I did call a couple of different buddies and said, "If you hear of any jobs, I would be interested." And they said, "You'd leave Notre Dame?" I said, "Yes, because I'm not going to get the trajectory that I think I'm ready for and that I should have."
mm,
One of my buddies was at Georgetown. They were in the process of creating a thing that eventually was called the Center for Social Justice Research, Teaching, and Service. And eventually they asked me to be the founding director. So loved it. When I was thinking of college and international relations, Georgetown would be one of the places.
mm,
It was a great experience in so many ways. I'm probably not the best director, but I had some fabulous colleagues and lots of good things. Started a program to get faculty to Africa, on and on. And then when the occasion occurred that I got my one and only paid leave while I was at
mm,
Georgetown, and I came back to our home in Michigan, and every morning I would pop up and say, "I'm on leave." About the eighth day, my husband said, "When are you leaving?" Because I think it was a little hard for him. But it was clear then that he wasn't going to come to Georgetown. So
mm,
we talked about what would I do? And I said, "Well, I'm not interested in going back to Notre Dame, but I know the president at Loyola because he had been at Georgetown. And why don't I just call and see if there's a position?" So I called, and you go through 14 layers to get to the president. But the president said, "Why don't you come out and visit and let's talk about that?" Short version, they offered a position to me to come and help think about social justice and ways in which it could be embedded in the system. So that's why I went to Loyola. Eventually became the assistant to the provost for social justice initiatives, got tenure in the university, and eventually spent 3 years full-time teaching in sociology. So opportunities came, Marissa, and
mm,
knowing people and the networks you've had and been part of, really important. And I I'm very happy with the career I've had. It's not what I wanted when I started, but
Mm.
evolved into some really rich opportunities, and I'm ever so grateful for it.
You've had such a robust career. Like, how do you feel you were able to balance your goals professionally with your personal life?
I think there's always a challenge in the contemporary society, and I think it will still be for your generation. It's all the assumption is always that women should be second. The men should get the whatever, whatever, and then the women should adjust, blah, 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 blah.
Mm.
And Andy and I, once we knew he wanted to be at Notre Dame, and there were opportunities at those in those moments, even for the kids to have certain kinds of education.
Mm.
Once they were through with college, it became clear that I would have more opportunities to think about not being at Notre Dame the rest of my life. So
Mm.
I don't know if that will be the case for your generation, but it's certainly been the case for people in mine, with rare exception. If you don't marry, it's a different trajectory. But if you marry, and especially in the Catholic environment that I grew up on, there are assumptions about your sacrifice for the well-being of the whole. And I think that was important for us. And the choices we made for the girls in college, high school, grade school, and college. But I also know that at one point they were on their way to their careers, and I was still full of lots of energy and excitement, and it was time for me. And that's when the Georgetown opportunity came up at just the
Mm.
right moment. So I'll be watching the next generations and how people negotiate. Because once you have a partner, whether it's you're a gay couple or a straight couple, there are, if you care about that unit, then decisions aren't made by one person. And when decisions have to be made, there've got to be some sense of mutuality and trust and love and some compromises because everybody can't do everything they want at any one moment in time. So a loving relationship is pretty important, and then you
Mm.
make decisions accordingly.
Do you think it was normal, like around you, like with your friends and stuff, for um, their husbands to be encouraging career goals like Andy was for you?
Certainly among the peers that I was closest to, the answer is yes. Uh, and I have talked with some of the wives over those years about, I chose part-time work. I didn't choose full-time work when I was pregnant with Karen and then the second child. So when we came back from Yale, I did accept an administrative position, which meant 8 to 5. So
Mm.
we had to arrange things for the children then, but they're a little older at that point too. And Andy could do more flexible things because he was full-time, tenured early on, full prof
Mm.
early on. And he loved things like sports. And so he would drive the teams to these various places to play soccer. Both girls played soccer. And one year he was voted the MVD, the most valuable driver, because the team, we had a yellow banana, we used to call it
Mm.
a Volkswagen, and taking the team places and things. So that was an important part. You have to have a spouse who's got some flexibility to do things that I wasn't going to be going to practices. I was
Mm.
now an assistant dean, and you just weren't going to be walking around going to practices. So that the relationship becomes important, and then it allows for certain things given the job structures, which, I hope we manage to keep changing job structures to allow 4 days a week, rather than five and working 60, 70, 80 hours, which is
Mm.
not right.
Mm. So, like over the course of your career, you've developed new educational programs, you've taught, you've researched. What do you think has been the most impactful thing in your career, or your favorite thing also?
Yeah, I don't know if I would say most for anything because so much of it is intertwined with each
Mm.
other's parts. But I am very proud of I helped start two programs back at Notre Dame. One was the Catholic social tradition, very important, and getting peace studies as a concentration, eventually minor, and eventually a whole set of things that came because other people got involved too. So to me, building things that allow students to pursue interests that they might not have otherwise had there not been those structures. I'm a real believer in structures
Mm,
that can facilitate and liberate and give people opportunities. The Catholic social tradition has really been a theme for my life in terms of writing. I'll tell you one, the most current one, which ended up being in a book that a group of us did. So, background. Georgetown has a center for Catholic social teaching and public life. I can't remember if that's the exact name, but it's something like that. And they invited a group of people who had something to do with center, social concerns and mostly Catholic social tradition. And I was at that meeting and loved it. Lots of good people, lots of great conversation, but I noticed that there was nothing specific on women. And that irritated me. So I grabbed a few of my friends that I knew and said, "Hey, would you like to just join the table on Saturday morning? Let's talk about women and CST and what this means." Very long story, short version. We decided, a group of us, that we would write a book together about women in Catholic social tradition.
mm,
So we did. And it came out a couple of years ago, and I wrote the chapter, Women's Work, What Counts in CST.
mm,
So a lot of the streams of my life came together at that particular research time, and it was such fun. Marissa, it was a joy. We shared our chapters. We met in a couple of different places, one in Villanova, one out in San Francisco, to meet and talk about our ideas. It was most exciting,
mm,
really affirming, and we got a book out of it as a result. So that's been very important for me because that theme of work from the time when I got my first job, because I thought I was smart. No, was my dad, Link? Thinking about work and women and what the church says in some of its encyclicals
mm,
is not always where I think we want to be. So, kind of trying to ferret out ideas in those documents and that experience that say there are possibilities, there really are possibilities to redefine work, to redefine who does what kind of work. And so that was just a joy and a wonderful research experience, and it pulled together so many of the things that mattered to me.
mm. So, looking back, what do you think your impact has been as a strong and driven woman on these higher education institutions and on your students?
I'd have to ask them to respond to that one rather than me. I'm grateful for the times in which I have been here and able to be at some of the great institutions at Notre Dame, Georgetown, and Loyola. What a privilege to have opportunities to work at places like that, where there's a value base that matches my own, where there are opportunities that I can advance or present for others. So it's certainly been a rich career from my point of view. I've loved almost all of it. When I think about being the director back at Georgetown, I think I did pretty well with my peers and those above me. I didn't have a lot of money at that time for the center, and we had a lot of turnover because Washington isn't a cheap place to live, but we didn't have tons of money to offer. And so people have to act and, get where the jobs are. And it was a different group. And I'm not sure I had all the skills that would have made it more facile and more enjoyable for everybody. So that would be a challenge, I think, just to think about how would you do it differently,
Mm,
knowing what you know now, that kind of thing. But on the whole, I really, it's just gratitude for the opportunities, for the people I've met, the people I've been with in my teaching and research. It's just gratitude is the only proper response with great joy.
that's wonderful. Well, looking at our time, I do have two final questions for you.
Sure.
So the first one is, we started this interview with me describing you as a professor, an innovator of new educational programs, an author. How would you describe yourself?
Hmm. How would I describe myself? As someone given certain opportunities to be in the field of higher education, in particular Catholic higher education, who tried hard to weave in the joys of doing work for justice in the context of teaching and research and service at three wonderful institutions that allowed me to flourish in ways that I don't know if I would have had I not had
Mhm.
those opportunities.
That's very cool. And that looking back on all that you've experienced and achieved, what makes you most proud of your younger self?
Gosh, again, I don't know if I would use those words, but I did say I really am proud of those two programs that I helped set up at Notre Dame and the Peace Studies and on the Catholic social tradition. I'm also very proud of, again, working with others. Those things wouldn't have happened, but we did it. Doing both at Georgetown and at Notre Dame, setting up some opportunities for faculty to experience being part of another world
Mm,
because of the Jesuits and their interest in Kenya, and because of Notre Dame and its interests in Kenya and Uganda, we could work with people to get faculty and administrators. Once from Notre Dame, a group, we went for 18 days. And then at Georgetown to help more faculty have those kinds of experiences. Just wonderful to be able to create things that others could then absorb. And the
mm,
one at Georgetown continued, and there's still people that are raising money for this particular school that we all worked on, St. Al's in Nairobi in uh, Kibera, which is the largest slum in sub-Saharan Africa. I think what a thrill, what a privilege, and that others wanted to do it and
mm,
wanted to join and think about the implications of that. So very, very pleased and thrilled that those opportunities with others we managed to create
mm.
new experiences.
Well, your life has been so interesting. I'm sure we could talk for hours, but as we close our interview, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story with me and our audience. It's been such a pleasure to hear from your story and to learn from it, and I'm so excited about the impact that it will have.
Thank you, Marissa, for your interest and for your questions and for just spending the time with me. It's fun to be asked questions and to reflect on your life in new ways. So thank you and best wishes on this project.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye
Yes.
now.
Bye.